The stars looked different when you knew something was hunting you. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the endless black space through the main screen. His ship had been exploring the outer rim for 6 months now, mapping new systems and looking for signs of life. They had found planets with strange rocks and gas clouds that glowed in the dark, but nothing that moved or thought or built cities. That changed 3 hours ago. Amy Carter walked up beside him, her tablet showing readings that made no sense. She was the ship's expert on alien life, though until today that job had been mostly theoretical. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight and her green eyes showed the same worry that Jake felt in his chest. "The energy patterns are getting stronger," she said quietly. "Whatever is out there, it's big and it's getting closer." Jake nodded and looked at the crew working around them. 23 people who had volunteered to fly further from Earth than any human had ever gone. They were scientists and engineers and explorers, not soldiers. The New Horizon carried survey equipment and mining tools, not weapons designed for war. The ship's computer made a soft sound that meant it had found something important. Lieutenant Ben Hayes turned from his station with a confused look on his face. His job was to watch for other ships, and right now his screens were showing something impossible. "Captain, we have 3 contacts approaching from the port side," Ben said. "They're not using any propulsion system I can identify. No heat signature, no radiation trail, nothing. They're just moving through space like they own it." Jake felt his stomach drop. First contact with alien life was supposed to be humanity's greatest moment, but something about this felt wrong. The approaching ships moved too smoothly, too perfectly, like they were sliding on invisible rails through the vacuum. "Amy, get down to the lab and start recording everything," Jake ordered. "Ben, try to establish communication. Standard first contact protocols." The alien ships came closer and Jake could see them clearly now. They looked like massive crystals that had been carved into the shape of arrows. Each one was easily 10 times the size of the New Horizon, and they glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to come from inside the crystal itself. They moved in perfect formation, never wavering or adjusting course. Ben's voice cracked as he spoke. "I'm broadcasting on all frequencies, sir." Mathematics, music, images of Earth, no response. Then everything changed at once. The lead alien ship suddenly appeared directly in front of them, though Jake would have sworn it had been thousands of kilometers away just a second before. The crystal surface rippled and a section became transparent, revealing the creature inside. Jake had expected many things from his first alien encounter, but not this. The being inside the ship was 12 feet tall and looked like it had been carved from living diamond. Its body was angular and perfect with no curves or soft edges anywhere. Instead of a face, it had a collection of geometric patterns that shifted and changed as it looked at them. When it moved, light passed through its crystal body and cast rainbow patterns on the walls of its ship. A voice filled the bridge of the New Horizon, though Jake could not see any communication equipment. The voice was like listening to wind chimes made of ice, beautiful and cold and completely without emotion. "Primitive carbon-based organisms," the voice said. "You will identify your species and prepare for cataloging." Amy's voice came over the intercom from the lab. "Captain, the energy readings just went off the charts. Whatever that thing is, it's generating more power than our entire ship uses in a year." Jake stepped forward and tried to keep his voice steady. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel New Horizon. We come in peace and seek diplomatic contact with your species." The alien being made a sound like glass breaking, which Jake realized might have been laughter. The geometric patterns on its face rearranged themselves into what might have been an expression of amusement. "Peace," the alien repeated, and the word sounded strange in its crystalline voice. "You speak of peace as if you have a choice in the matter. I am Zarthek, the eternal voice of the Valeth Empire. Your species will be evaluated for integration into the natural order." "Integration?" Jake asked, though he was starting to suspect he did not want to know the answer. "All inferior life forms serve their betters," Zarthek explained, as if talking to a child. "Your primitive biology suggests limited intelligence, but you have somehow achieved crude space travel. This anomaly requires investigation. You will surrender your vessel and submit to examination." Ben looked at Jake with wide eyes and shook his head slightly. The message was clear. The ship's computers had found no way to fight or escape these aliens. They were trapped. Amy's voice came over the intercom again, higher and more urgent. "Captain, I'm reading massive power buildup in all 3 ships. Something big is about to happen." Jake made a decision that went against every diplomatic protocol Earth had ever written. We respectfully decline your offer, Zarthek. Humans are a free species and we don't surrender to anyone. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Zarthek raised one crystal arm and pointed at something outside the ship. Jake turned to look and saw a large asteroid floating about a kilometer away. It was the size of a city block and had been there when they arrived in this system. Zarthek's ship produced a single, pure musical note that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The note lasted for 2 seconds and then stopped. The asteroid simply ceased to exist, not destroyed or blown apart, but gone as completely as if it had never been there at all. That demonstration was provided for educational purposes, Zarthek said. Your vessel is constructed of inferior materials but contains interesting anomalies. We will begin integration procedures immediately. Jake felt sweat running down his back as he looked at his crew. Ben was frantically working at his station, trying to find some way to escape. Amy had come back to the bridge and was staring at the alien ship with a mixture of fear and scientific fascination. Ben, can we jump to hyperspace? Jake asked quietly. Working on it, sir, Ben replied. The navigation computer is having trouble calculating a safe route with those ships so close. Their energy fields are interfering with our sensors. The 3 alien ships began to move closer, surrounding the new horizon like wolves circling prey. Jake could see more geometric patterns appearing on their crystal hulls, probably some kind of scanning equipment preparing to take his ship apart piece by piece. Ben, forget about safe routes, Jake ordered. Pick any direction that gets us away from here and jump on my mark. Sir, a blind jump could put us inside a star or a black hole, Ben protested. Better than letting them turn us into specimens, Jake replied.
Amy, send everything we've recorded back to Earth on a tight beam transmission.
Make sure humanity knows what's coming. Amy's fingers flew over her tablet as she prepared the message. Transmission ready, sir. Jake took one last look at Zarthek's perfect crystal face and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature on the bridge. The alien was watching them with the same interest a scientist might show when studying bacteria under a microscope. Jump, Jake ordered. The new horizon disappeared into hyperspace just as the Valeth ships fired some kind of energy beam at the space where they had been. Jake did not know it yet, but one of those beams had managed to attach a tracking signal to his ship's hull in the split second before they escaped. Somewhere behind them, Zarthek the Eternal was already planning humanity's destruction. The emergency meeting on Luna Station brought together every important person in human space. Admiral Lisa Hayes sat at the head of the long metal table and looked at the faces around her. Each person represented millions of human lives that might soon be in terrible danger. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the space station's life support systems. Captain Jake Morrison had arrived 2 days ago with his crew and their impossible story. His ship bore scorch marks from energy weapons that Earth scientists could barely understand. The data his team had collected made every military expert in the room feel sick with worry. Dr. Richard Cole stood up and activated the holographic display above the table. Numbers and equations filled the air in glowing blue letters. Richard was humanity's best physicist, and if anyone could understand alien technology, it would be him. The problem was that what he had learned made no sense at all. The energy readings from the Valeth ships are beyond anything we can produce, Richard said, his voice tired from 3 days without sleep. They generate power levels that should require a star-sized fusion reactor, but their ships are maybe a kilometer long. Either they have discovered new laws of physics or they are using technology so advanced that it might as well be magic. Colonel Sam Parker raised his hand. Sam commanded the military's best reconnaissance teams, and his job was to gather information about enemies. Right now he looked like a man who had been given an impossible task. Admiral, my teams have been monitoring the outer system since Captain Morrison returned, Sam reported. We've detected at least 12 separate Valeth scout groups moving through human space. They're not hiding and they're not trying to avoid our detection. It's like they want us to know they're there. Amy Carter, who had requested to attend the meeting, spoke up from her seat near the back of the room. From what we observed, the Valeth don't consider us a threat at all. They were studying us the same way we might study insects. I don't think they believe we're capable of fighting back. Admiral Hayes felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. She had spent 30 years in the human fleet and had fought pirates and rebels across a dozen star systems. None of that experience meant anything when facing aliens who could make asteroids disappear with a musical note. What about our defenses? she asked. "Can we modify our weapons to fight them?" Engineer Maria Santos shook her head sadly. Maria had been working around the clock with her team to find some way to hurt the Valeth ships. Her dark hair was messy and her clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in her laboratory. "Their ships seem to be made of some kind of living crystal," Maria explained. "Our energy weapons just bounce off like we're shooting lasers at a mirror. Kinetic weapons might work, but we would need to get close enough to hit them, and their own weapons have range measured in light minutes." Dr. Amanda Foster cleared her throat and stood up. Amanda ran Earth's largest research facility and had been working on experimental weapons for the past 5 years. Her team had created some impressive technology, but nothing that could match what the Valeth had shown. "We're not completely helpless," Amanda said. "Our analysis of the energy signatures suggests their weapons work by creating harmonic resonance patterns. If we can understand how those patterns work, we might be able to disrupt them or create countermeasures." President Helen Brooks had been quiet during most of the meeting, but now she leaned forward in her chair. As the leader of Earth's government, she had to make decisions that could save or doom the entire human species. "How long do we have?" she asked. Jake Morrison answered her question. "Based on their movements and the tracking signal we detected on our hull, I estimate we have maybe 6 months before they begin a full invasion. The scout groups are mapping our defenses and population centers. 6 months to prepare for a war against enemies who considered humans to be primitive insects." Admiral Hayes looked around the table and saw fear on every face, but also determination. Humans had faced impossible odds before and somehow survived. "Colonel Parker, I want your teams to gather as much intelligence as possible about Valeth movements and technology," Hayes ordered. "Try to capture one of their scout ships if you can do it safely." Sam nodded grimly. "Yes, ma'am. My people are already working on stealth approaches. Dr. Cole and Dr. Foster, combine your teams and focus on understanding their harmonic weapons," Hayes continued. "If we can't build better shields, maybe we can find a way to turn their own technology against them. Maria, I want every shipyard in human space working at maximum capacity. Build everything we have designs for and then start building experimental ships based on whatever our research teams discover." The engineer nodded. "I'll have production estimates for you by tomorrow. President Brooks, we need to prepare the civilian population without causing panic. People need to know we're facing a threat, but they also need to believe we can win." Helen Brooks had been thinking about this problem since Jake Morrison's report reached Earth. "I'll address the colonies tomorrow. We'll call it enhanced defense preparation in response to new threats in the outer systems." As the meeting broke up, people began filing out of the room to start the enormous task of preparing humanity for war. Jake Morrison stayed behind with Admiral Hayes and Amy Carter. "Admiral, there's something else," Jake said quietly. "When we were facing Zarthek, I got the impression that he was genuinely puzzled by us. Not just our technology, but the way we acted and thought. He seemed to expect us to surrender immediately." Amy nodded in agreement. "The Valeth appear to think in very logical, predictable patterns. They were confused when we chose to run instead of submitting to examination. I think they have trouble understanding emotional responses." Admiral Hayes filed this information away in her mind. Every piece of intelligence about the enemy might be important when the shooting started. Over the following weeks, human space became a hive of frantic activity. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels and mining equipment retooled to produce warships. Research facilities that studied peaceful applications of technology began designing weapons. Military bases that had been quiet for years suddenly filled with recruits learning how to fight an enemy unlike anything humans had ever faced. Colonel Parker's reconnaissance teams began their dangerous work of shadowing Valeth scout groups. They used small, fast ships with experimental stealth technology to get close enough to gather detailed sensor readings. 3 teams were lost in the first month when their ships simply vanished near Valeth vessels. But the survivors brought back valuable information. The alien ships moved in perfect formations and communicated using complex harmonic frequencies. Their hulls were indeed made of living crystal that could reshape itself as needed. Most importantly, the scouts seemed to be following predetermined patrol routes with military precision. Dr. Cole and Dr. Foster made their first breakthrough when analyzing debris from a Valeth energy weapon impact. The molecular structure of the destroyed material showed signs of harmonic disruption at the quantum level. The aliens were somehow using sound waves to break apart the fundamental bonds between atoms. Maria Santos used this information to begin designing new ship hull configurations that might resist harmonic attacks. Her engineers worked 18-hour days testing different crystal matrices and metal alloys that could potentially deflect or absorb the alien weapons. Meanwhile, President Brooks faced the enormous challenge of keeping human civilization functioning while preparing for possible extinction. Food production, medical supplies, and basic infrastructure all needed to continue, operating even as resources were diverted to military production. The colonies furthest from Earth began reporting strange sensor readings and unexplained equipment failures. The Valeth scouts were getting bolder, moving closer to human settlements and conducting detailed scans of population centers and industrial facilities. As the 6th month approached, Admiral Hayes received reports that made her blood run cold. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Valeth fleet gathering at the edge of human space. Hundreds of crystal ships, some larger than anything humans had ever built, were preparing for what could only be an invasion. The time for preparation was almost over. The first attack came at dawn on New Beijing Colony. The settlers had maybe 30 seconds of warning before 3 Valeth ships appeared in their sky, like falling stars made of crystal. The colony's defense platforms fired. Everything they had but the energy beams just bounced off the alien, hulls like raindrops hitting a window. Commander, John Kelly watched the attack from his ship hidden behind the colony's largest moon. His orders were to observe and report, not to engage the enemy. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, watching helpless as the crystal ships destroyed every building in the settlement with their harmonic weapons. The strange thing was how efficient the Valeth were. They did not waste time or energy destroying things that had no military value. They targeted the power plants, communication centers, and defense platforms with surgical precision. The residential areas were left mostly intact, though empty of life. When the attack was over, John's sensors detected Valeth troops moving through the ruins. They looked like smaller versions of Zarthek, about 8 feet tall and made of the same living crystal as their ships. They moved through the colony in perfect formation, scanning everything with beams of blue light that came from their hands. 3 hours later, the Valeth ships departed, leaving behind a strange metal tower that hummed with the same harmonic frequency as their weapons. John realized they were not just destroying human colonies, they were claiming them. Over the next 2 months, 12 more colonies fell to Valeth attacks. Each assault followed the same pattern: overwhelming force, surgical strikes, complete victory. The human fleet tried to respond, but their ships always arrived too late. The aliens seemed to know exactly where and when to strike for maximum effect. Admiral Hayes called another emergency meeting, but this time, the mood was very different. Fear had been replaced by desperate anger. Humanity was losing the war and losing it badly. "We need to change our tactics," Colonel Parker said, his face grim with exhaustion. "Every time we try to fight them head-on, we get crushed. They have better ships, better weapons, and they seem to know what we're going to do before we do it." Dr. Cole had spent weeks analyzing wreckage from the destroyed colonies. His findings were disturbing but also gave him an idea that might change everything. The Valeth technology is incredibly advanced, but it has one weakness, Richard explained to the group. It's too perfect. Every harmonic frequency is precisely calculated. Every energy pattern follows exact mathematical formulas. Their weapons work by creating perfect resonance patterns that tear apart molecular bonds. Maria Santos leaned forward in her chair. "What does that mean for us?" "It means they expect everything to follow the same logical rules they do," Richard continued. "Their sensors are designed to track ships moving in predictable patterns. Their weapons are calibrated for targets that behave according to known physics." Jake Morrison understood immediately. "You're saying we need to be unpredictable?" "Exactly," Richard said with the first smile anyone had seen from him in weeks. "If we can disrupt their calculations, make their sensors give them bad information, we might have a chance." The first test of this new strategy came when the Valeth attacked the mining station at Tianda, Kepler 442b. John Kelly was ready for them, this time with a squadron of 12 modified human ships. Instead of flying in standard military formations, his pilots had been trained to move like they were drunk or insane. The battle started badly. 3 Valeth ships appeared and immediately destroyed the mining station's defenses with their usual precision. But when they turned their weapons on John's squadron, something unexpected happened. The human ships were flying in patterns that made no sense. One pilot was spinning his vessel while flying backwards. Another was using random thruster burns that sent his ship tumbling through space like a broken toy. A third was flying in a perfect figure-8 pattern while broadcasting old Earth music on all frequencies. The Valeth weapons, calibrated for logical targets following predictable courses, kept missing. Energy beams designed to hit ships flying in straight lines passed harmlessly through empty space as human vessels danced around them like leaves in a hurricane. John's ship managed to get close enough to one of the alien vessels to fire a full spread of kinetic projectiles at point-blank range. The crystal hull cracked and the ship lost power, drifting helplessly through space. For the first time in the war, humans had damaged a Valeth ship. The victory was small, but the implications were enormous. Within days, every human pilot in the fleet was learning new flight patterns based on chaos theory and random mathematics. Ships began carrying computers programmed to generate truly random course corrections. Dr. Foster made the next breakthrough when she discovered that human brainwaves, especially when people were emotional or creative, generated electromagnetic patterns that interfered with Valeth sensors. She began developing equipment that could amplify and broadcast these patterns. The Battle of Titan became humanity's first real victory. When Zarthek himself arrived with a massive fleet to destroy Earth's orbital defenses, he found something he had never encountered before, an enemy that refused to follow the rules. Admiral Hayes had positioned her ships in formations based on abstract art rather than military doctrine. Her pilots flew courses determined by rolling dice and flipping coins. Most importantly, every ship was broadcasting a mixture of human music, poetry, and random conversation on frequencies that disrupted Valeth communications. The crystal ships found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to exist in multiple places at once. Their perfect sensors gave them contradictory readings as human vessels appeared to flicker in and out of reality. Their harmonic weapons, designed to destroy orderly matter, had trouble focusing on targets that defied logical behavior. Jake Morrison led a squadron of fighters in an attack on Zarthek's flagship. His pilots had been trained in what military experts were calling combat jazz, improvised flying techniques that emphasized creativity over precision. They swooped and dived around the massive crystal ship like birds avoiding a storm. Amy Carter, now serving as a tactical advisor, coordinated the chaos from the command ship. Her job was to make sure the human forces remained completely unpredictable. She used a combination of random number generators, emotional music, and pure human intuition to give orders that no logical mind could anticipate. The Valeth fleet began to show signs of confusion. Ships that had moved in perfect formation for thousands of years started making small errors in positioning. Their weapons fire became less accurate as their targeting computers struggled to process the chaotic human behavior. Zarthek's voice filled the communication channels, no longer cold and perfect but showing signs of something that might have been frustration. "You fight without logic," the alien commander broadcast. "Your tactics serve no strategic purpose. How do you achieve victory through madness?" John Kelly, his ship dancing around a Valeth destroyer while firing randomly timed missile salvos, answered over the open channel. "That's the point," he said cheerfully. "We're not trying to make sense. We're just being human." The battle raged for 6 hours and ended when Zarthek's flagship suffered a cascade failure in its harmonic systems. The perfect crystal structure began resonating with the chaos of human consciousness and literally shook itself apart. As the Valeth fleet retreated, Admiral Hayes realized that humanity had found something more powerful than advanced technology. They had found the strength in their own beautiful, chaotic, completely unpredictable nature. The war was far from over, but for the first time since first contact, humans believed they could win. The discovery that changed everything came from an unexpected place. Dr. Benjamin Moore had been studying the brain scans of human pilots who performed best in combat against the Valeth. What he found in the data made him question everything he thought he knew about consciousness and physics. Benjamin called Admiral Hayes to his laboratory at Luna Station with excitement in his voice. When she arrived, she found him staring at a wall covered with brainwave patterns and quantum equations that hurt her eyes to look at. "Admiral, human consciousness generates quantum interference," Benjamin said without any greeting. "When we think, especially when we're emotional or creative, our brains produce patterns that exist outside normal space-time. The more chaotic our thoughts become, the more we interfere with reality itself. Lisa Hayes had commanded spaceships and fought battles across the galaxy, but quantum physics made her head hurt. Explain it like I'm 5 years old, Doctor. The Valeth technology works by calculating the exact position and behavior of everything around them, Benjamin continued. But when humans are nearby, especially humans who are feeling strong emotions, their calculations become impossible. We literally exist in too many probable states at once for their computers to track. This news spread through the human fleet like wildfire. Pilots who had been trained to suppress their emotions in combat were now encouraged to feel everything as strongly as possible. Ships that had carried only military equipment began stocking art supplies, musical instruments, and books of poetry. Admiral Karen Stone took command of the largest human fleet ever assembled. Her mission was to carry the war directly to the Valeth by attacking their staging area at Wolf 359. The fleet consisted of 300 ships, crewed by volunteers who had undergone something called chaos conditioning. The conditioning process was unlike any military training in human history. Instead of learning discipline and following orders, pilots were taught to embrace their emotions and trust their instincts completely. They studied abstract art and jazz music. They practiced meditation techniques designed to make their thoughts as random and unpredictable as possible. Captain Morrison commanded the flagship of this strange new fleet. His ship had been renamed the Entropy, and its bridge looked more like an art gallery than a military command center. The walls were covered with paintings created by the crew, and soft music played constantly to keep everyone in a creative, emotional state. The journey to Wolf 359 took 3 weeks, and every day brought new discoveries about the power of human consciousness. Ships flying in formation with emotionally heightened crews began experiencing what could only be described as quantum entanglement. When one pilot felt fear, ships hundreds of kilometers away would suddenly change course to avoid dangers that their sensors had not yet detected. Amy Carter had become something more than a scientist during the war. Her ability to understand and communicate with alien minds had evolved into an almost supernatural talent for predicting enemy behavior. She could feel the rigid thought patterns of Valeth commanders like cold metal pressing against her consciousness. "They're waiting for us," she told Admiral Stone as the fleet approached Wolf 359. "Tsar, deck has assembled over 500 ships and they're arranged in perfect defensive formations. He still thinks he can win through superior firepower and logical tactics." The Valeth fleet was indeed impressive. Crystal ships arranged in geometric patterns that created overlapping fields of fire, covering every possible approach route. Their formation was mathematically perfect, a work of art created by minds that understood the universe as a collection of predictable equations. Admiral Stone gave the order that began the strangest battle in galactic history. Instead of attacking in organized waves, the human fleet scattered like seeds in the wind. Each ship chose its own course based on the emotions and instincts of its crew. Some pilots followed geometric patterns inspired by the music they were hearing. Others flew routes determined by the abstract paintings hanging in their ships. The result was beautiful chaos. 300 human vessels moved through space like a flock of birds that had learned to dance. No two ships followed the same path, and no computer in the galaxy could have predicted where any of them would go next. The Valeth weapons opened fire and immediately ran into problems. Energy beams calibrated to hit logical targets found empty space where their calculations said human ships should be. The perfect defensive formation began to develop gaps as crystal ships tried to rotate and track enemies that seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. Commander Kelly led a squadron of fighters in an attack that defied every rule of military strategy. His pilots flew their ships like they were surfing on invisible waves, riding the quantum interference patterns generated by their own heightened consciousness. They dove between Valeth energy beams and fired their weapons at random intervals that somehow always seemed to hit their targets. The breakthrough came when Dr. Foster activated her new experimental weapon system. She had managed to weaponize human creativity itself by building devices that could amplify and broadcast the quantum patterns generated by emotional human minds. When she turned on the system, every person in the fleet began thinking as chaotically as possible. The effect on the Valeth fleet was immediate and devastating. Ships that had maintained perfect formation for thousands of years began drifting out of position. Their harmonic weapons started firing at empty space as their targeting systems received impossible data about targets that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Zarthek's flagship, a crystal cathedral the size of a city, began resonating with frequencies that its builders had never intended. The alien commander tried to maintain control but found his perfect mind struggling to process the quantum chaos created by 300 human crews, all feeling and thinking and creating at maximum intensity. Captain Morrison led the final assault on the Valeth command ship. His attack squadron consisted of 12 pilots who had spent the entire journey to Wolf 359 writing poetry and composing music. Their ships moved through space like notes in a jazz improvisation, each vessel following its own rhythm while somehow remaining in perfect harmony with the others. The Entropy fired its main weapons not at the Valeth ship's shields or engines, but at the geometric patterns on its hull that controlled its harmonic systems. The crystal structure began to crack as it tried to process the contradictory quantum information being broadcast by the human consciousness amplifiers. Inside his perfect crystalline command center, Zarthek experienced something no Valeth had felt in millions of years. For the first time since his species had achieved technological perfection, he felt uncertainty. The rigid logical framework that defined his entire existence began to fracture as he was exposed to the beautiful madness of human thought. How is this possible? Zarthek broadcast on all frequencies, his voice no longer cold and perfect but tinged with something that might have been fear. Your tactics serve no logical purpose. Your formations follow no mathematical principles. You fight like you are insane. Amy Carter answered him from the bridge of the Entropy, her voice carrying the warmth and chaos that defined humanity. We fight like we're alive, she said, simply. The Valeth flagship broke, apart in a cascade of crystalline fragments that sparkled like stars as they tumbled through space. The alien fleet, leaderless and unable to process the quantum chaos surrounding them, began a retreat that would take them all the way back to their home systems. As Admiral Stone watched the enemy ships flee, she realized that humanity had not just won a battle. They had discovered something that made them more powerful than any technology in the galaxy: the infinite creative potential of consciousness itself. The journey to the Valeth homeworld took humanity deeper into space than they had ever traveled before. Admiral Stone's fleet had grown to over 800 ships as more human vessels joined what everyone now called the Chaos Brigade. Each ship carried not just weapons and soldiers, but artists and musicians and poets whose job was to think as creatively as possible. The Valeth homeworld appeared on their sensors like a jewel floating in the darkness. The entire planet was covered in crystal cities that resonated with perfect harmonic frequencies. Massive towers reached toward the sky in geometric patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Everything was precise and mathematical, and completely without any trace of randomness or disorder. Dr. Susan Miller had made a discovery that would change the course of the final battle. Her 5-year-old daughter Emma had been drawing pictures while visiting the research station, and Susan noticed something amazing in the child's chaotic scribbles. The random lines and colors contained mathematical patterns that perfectly disrupted Valeth harmonic sequences. Children's art is the most powerful weapon we have, Susan explained to Admiral Stone. Young minds haven't learned to think logically yet. They create pure chaos that no computer can predict or counter. This led to the strangest military order in human history. Every ship in the fleet began broadcasting children's drawings, finger paintings, and crayon scribbles on all frequencies. The quantum interference generated by innocent creativity proved more devastating to Valeth technology than any bomb or missile. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Entropy and watched the alien world grow larger on his screens. His crew had spent the journey creating the most chaotic mix of human culture they could imagine. They had recordings of everything from classical symphonies to heavy metal music, from Shakespeare's sonnets to graffiti painted on subway walls. The plan was simple and completely insane. Instead of trying to destroy the Valeth homeworld, humanity was going to infect it with chaos. They would broadcast every form of human creativity and emotion directly at the planet's crystal structures until the perfect order that held their civilization together simply fell apart. Amy Carter coordinated the assault from the command ship. Her job was to make sure the human broadcast remained as unpredictable as possible. She used random number generators and her own emotional intuition to switch between different types of content every few seconds. The attack began with Mozart's symphony, number 40, broadcast at full power toward the planet's largest crystal spire. The perfect geometric structure began to vibrate as its harmonic systems tried to process the complex emotional mathematics of human music. Cracks appeared in the crystal surface like spiderwebs spreading across a frozen lake. Then the music changed to a death metal song about rebellion and freedom. The contrast between the classical symphony and the aggressive modern music created quantum dissonance that rippled through the planet's entire communication network. Crystal cities that had stood unchanged for millions of years began to flicker and shift. Commander Kelly led a squadron of fighters in close orbit around the planet, broadcasting children's laughter and playground songs. The pure joy and chaos of young human voices proved to be like acid to the Valeth's perfect crystal minds. Entire sections of their cities began to lose structural integrity as their controlling computers crashed trying to process the impossible mathematics of innocence. The real breakthrough came when Dr. Foster activated the consciousness amplifiers that had been installed on every ship in the fleet. 800 crews of emotionally heightened humans began thinking and feeling and creating, with maximum intensity, all at the same time. The quantum interference patterns they generated were visible from space as aurora-like lights dancing around the planet. On the surface of the Valeth homeworld, something unprecedented was happening. Crystal beings who had lived in perfect logical order for their entire species' existence began to experience emotions for the first time. The chaotic human thoughts broadcasting from the fleet above touched their minds like colors, touching the consciousness of someone who had been blind from birth, sir. Theg stood in his crystal palace and felt his perfect world crumbling around him. The harmonic frequencies that maintained his civilization were being disrupted by patterns his mind could not comprehend. For the first time in his long existence, he experienced uncertainty, confusion, and something that might have been wonder. "Stop this madness," he broadcast to the human fleet, but his voice no longer carried the cold authority of a supreme being. There was something new in his crystalline tone, something warm and chaotic and alive. Captain Morrison answered him while his crew played jazz music and read poetry over the communication channels. "We're not trying to destroy you, Zarthek. We're trying to free you." The liberation of the Valeth Empire happened faster than anyone had expected. As the human chaos broadcasts continued, crystal beings across the planet began to change. Their perfect geometric forms started developing curves and asymmetries. Their minds, freed from the rigid logic that had defined their species, began to explore the infinite possibilities of emotional thought. Some Valeth could not handle the transition. Their crystal bodies, designed for perfect order, simply ceased to function when exposed to the beautiful madness of human consciousness. They faded away like ice melting in the sun, finally finding peace in dissolution. But others embraced the chaos and discovered something their species had lost eons ago: the ability to grow and change and become something new. These survivors began to reshape their crystal forms, creating bodies that could feel and express emotions. Their cities transformed from perfect geometric structures into flowing organic shapes that pulsed with life and creativity. Zarthek himself underwent the greatest transformation of all. Standing in his collapsing palace, he felt the rigid walls of logic that had imprisoned his mind for millions of years finally break apart. For the first time since his species had achieved perfection, he laughed. The sound was like crystal wind chimes caught in a hurricane, beautiful and chaotic and completely alive. "I understand now," he said to Morrison over the communication channel. "We were not supreme. We were prisoners of our own perfection. You have not conquered us. You have saved us." The war ended not with destruction, but with the most beautiful sound the galaxy had ever heard: the laughter of beings learning to be imperfect. Across the Valeth homeworld, crystal cities rang with new harmonies that included discord and chaos and the infinite creative potential of conscious minds set free. In the months that followed, the former Valeth Empire became a center of art and music and scientific discovery. Species that had been enslaved for thousands of years were liberated not by force but by exposure to the chaotic beauty of human culture. The galaxy, freed from the tyranny of perfect order, began to bloom with creativity and life. Captain Morrison returned to Earth as a hero, but he knew the real victory belonged to every human who had ever drawn a picture, written a song, or told a joke. Humanity had saved the galaxy not through superior weapons or technology, but by being exactly what they had always been: beautifully, chaotically, magnificently human. Admiral Stone established the Galactic Chaos Council, a governing body that made decisions through a combination of logic, emotion, art, and pure random chance. Former Velith beings served alongside humans and dozens of other species, all working together to maintain the delicate balance between order and chaos that kept the galaxy alive and growing. The few surviving members of the old Velith Empire often said that humanity had not destroyed their civilization but had given birth to something infinitely better. They had learned that true strength came not from being perfect, but from having the courage to be wonderfully, chaotically, triumphantly imperfect. And in the deepest reaches of space, where new civilizations were just beginning to reach for the stars, they told stories of the chaos bringers who had shown the galaxy that the most powerful force in the universe was not technology or logic, but the infinite creative potential of consciousness itself.